Hello. This is one of my favorite stories, Paula and the Panda Bear. Let's go. It was bedtime in the Ortega house, and Mr. and Mrs. Ortega had 3 great children who always went to bed quietly and without complaining. Most nights, Mr. Ortega went upstairs to their bedroom and read them a story, and it was always the youngest, Paula, who stayed awake the longest, listening to every last detail of the book that was being read to them. Sometimes Mr. Ortega was tired after a long day's work, but he always found a bit more energy so that his girls would get some good quality time with him. It wasn't easy being the only man in the house sometimes, but he wouldn't change any of his 3 angels for the world. As he finished tonight's story, he gave Paula a peck on the cheek and turned out the light, and she drifted off to sleep, to dream things that only little kids can dream of, like fairy tales, ponies, unicorns, and handsome princes saving beautiful princesses. But tonight was different. Maybe her father's story had influenced her dream in some way, but she soon found herself wandering along a thin trail in a jungle. It wasn't a scary jungle, and there were no spiders and no snakes to scare her, and she felt perfectly safe as she looked up at the high trees and saw monkeys leaping from tree to tree. This was a wonderful dream, she thought. But how could she think it was a wonderful dream? How could she know this was a dream? This is odd, she thought. She had never had thoughts like this in a dream before. Normally, she only remembered dreams after she had woken up. She had never had thoughts during a dream before. Was she awake or asleep? Just ahead, she saw a gate in the middle of the jungle. A gate with an arch and a long wall either side. But she hadn't seen a long wall before then. Where did this long wall suddenly appear from? Surely she must be dreaming now, as there was no other explanation for the suddenly appearing wall and gate. There were 2 pillars either side of the gate, with a plaque, quite dirty, and Paula couldn't see what was written on the plaque, so she lifted up her paw. Her paw? I've got paws? Why have I got paws? Big black paws with long black claws. This was the strangest dream Paula had ever had. She brushed at the plaque with her big black paw and strained to read the words engraved on it. Here is the plaque. And the words say, "This house belongs to Sandy, and no one is allowed to come in without an invitation. If you try to come in without an invitation from Sandy, you will be rub-tingled by order of Sandy. Do not ring the bell." This was even weirder, because Paula didn't know anyone called Sandy in her life. Why had she put such an odd name in her dream? By now she was intrigued, and she was desperate for an invitation from Sandy. But hang on, what did the plaque say? If you try to come in without an invitation, you will be rub-tingled. What does this mean? Rub-tingled? It certainly doesn't sound very dangerous. In fact, it sounded quite nice. Paula found herself being strangely drawn to the idea of entering without an invitation, just so she could be rub-tingled. And anyway, it also said on the plaque that she should not ring the bell. So therefore it was impossible to get an invitation. She looked around and she couldn't see any door handle, but she could see the bell button with the words "Press me" on it. Oh, this was a dilemma. To press or not to press? This was the question. Paula made the decision that as this was only a dream, then nothing bad could happen to her. So she raised up her big black paw and pressed the button. The most almighty sounds started to emanate from behind the gate, like sirens and dogs barking and banging and shouting, and it was the most fearful of noises. And behind her, the birds started flying away, and the monkeys all started screeching and jumping from one tree to another in a state of panic. This may be just a dream, but Paula was really, truthfully, honestly scared right now. And in that moment, she wished she hadn't pushed that button. Just then, a small hatch opened in the gate, and a small head popped out, looking from side to side, looking for the person who had pressed the button. Paula was standing right there in front of the gate, but this grotesque little creature with lumps and bumps all over his face seemed not to be able to see her. She seemed invisible, and Paula felt a little offended that she was being ignored in this way, so she spoke up quickly in case the creature closed the hatch again. She certainly didn't want to press that button again, that was for sure. Excuse me, but are you looking for me? The creature certainly heard her speak, because it stopped looking around and reacted as though it had heard it. But it did not look directly at her, and Paula spoke again. Can't you see me? I'm standing here, right in front of you. Look, I'm here, right here. The creature looked in the direction of the voice and looked Paula in the eyes. Oh, yes, you're there, he said, as though he hadn't been able to see her, even though she was less than 2 feet away from him. What brings you here? Why did you ring the bell? Do you have an appointment? How did you find Sandy's house? What is a panda doing in Tinkleberry Woods? Paula was about to start answering all the questions in the order they were asked, but she suddenly realised what he had said. A panda? Do you think I'm a panda? Why do you think I am a panda? And then she looked down at her big black paw again, and then she looked down at her body and could see her big, fat, white, hairy belly, her black, hairy arms and legs, and her big black paws, all 4 of them. How silly of me, she thought. I knew I had a big, black, hairy paw, so why didn't I question that? And wasn't a big, black, hairy paw a big enough clue for you, Paula? She thought. Paula quickly recovered her composure. This was just a dream. There was nothing to worry about. She just needed to get on with finding out what was on the other side of the wall. She ignored the ugliness of the creature, who still gave her the impression that he could not see her too well, and continued. Well, sir, I was presented with a dilemma due to the ambiguity of your plaque. It says I need an appointment to enter, which is why I rang the bell. But it also says that I must not ring the bell. So, sir, please explain to me how I should get an appointment without ringing the bell. The creature looked at her with a look of disbelief. But Paula, you do have an appointment. What are you talking about? He said. Paula not only looked confused, She was completely confused now. Hadn't he just given her a hard time about being there? Hadn't he asked her how she had found the house? Surely, if she had an appointment, she would know all these things. This creature was beginning to annoy her now, and so she decided to show him who was boss. "Now, look here, you ugly little man. I don't know who you think you are talking to, but..." And with those words, the little window slammed shut, and the creature was gone. Paula was furious. How could he be so rude? What a horrid little man! She quickly leaned to her left and went to press the button, and she raised up her hand. Her hand? She had a hand again? This is one ridiculous dream, she thought, and pressed the button again. But this time there was no sound, no shouting, no sirens, nothing. She thumped on the door, boom, 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 and nothing. She tried to peer over the top of the gate and then the wall, but she just wasn't tall enough. She felt her blood beginning to boil. And hey, if she did have an appointment with the mysterious Sandy, then she would be late, and that little monster was going to get into deep trouble. She would make sure of that once she got in. She looked around her to see if there was a tree she could climb or something, and when she looked back, she couldn't believe her eyes, because the gate was wide open. She had only turned her head for a few seconds, and there it was, completely opened, revealing a dark, black, dirty, burnt-looking wilderness on the other side. Paula had never seen a place she less wanted to explore in her life. She liked green places. Yes, green was her favourite colour. It made her feel quiet and tranquil, and she looked back at the wonderful woods behind her, and she realised she has to make a tough decision. If she was going to venture forward into the unknown world of Sandy and the ugly dwarf, or not. But wait, this is just a dream. Silly Paula, go for it. Go through the gate. Have an adventure while you sleep. Yes. She listened to the voices in her head and nodded her approval, and with that she stepped through the gate, and everything went black. Then all of a sudden she couldn't feel the ground beneath her feet, and she realised she was falling and falling, and she was getting faster and faster, and this was the blackest hole she could ever imagine. She couldn't see a thing as she fell, and then all of a sudden, bang! And then nothing. Paula! 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 Come on! Wake up, sleepyhead! Paula was aware of the voice and recognised it immediately as Sandy's voice. Her eyes were tightly closed as she tried to remember what had happened in her dream. She smiled at the ridiculous situation her brain had invented for her and wished that the dream could have continued. But Sandy persisted. Paula, Paula, Paula. And eventually, after he gently tickled her tummy, Paula slowly opened her eyes. Sandy was standing in front of her with a brush in his hand and a black bag over his shoulder. "Good morning, Sleeping Beauty," he said gently, and started to sweep the floor around Paula. Paula rubbed her eyes and felt the soft fur of her paw against her eyes, and slowly she started to focus on everything around her. First, she saw the bars, big, long, tall bars around her, and the floor. There was no bed, just concrete with straw here and there. And Sandy was whistling as he swept the floor and looked at her with warm eyes. "You had a good sleep, didn't you? The others have gone outside to eat, but I didn't want you to miss all the best bamboo, so I've brought you some of the youngest shoots, as you are the youngest and you're still growing." Paula sat in silence until she heard a siren in the distance, and Sandy started to pack up his things quickly. She heard a few shouts in the distance, and then Sandy spoke. "There we go. The zoo opens in 5 minutes. Put on your best smile for the people, Paula. You are the star of this zoo, and everyone that comes this week is desperate to see you. Have a good day. See you tonight, little one." And with that, Sandy opened a gate in the bars and was gone. Paula tried to speak, but nothing came out of her mouth. And then the crowds arrived, and still she said nothing as they clicked their cameras and waved at her. "Hi, Paula. Hi, Paula. Hi, Paula." Bye.